Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you with us for today's webinar. We are delighted to welcome hotels from all around the globe across EMEA and APAC. Just to be sure that everything is working properly on your side, could you please type in the chat box the city where you are located, please? Frankfurt, Tallinn, great. Milan, Zurich, wonderful. Rome, Singapore, wow, Thailand. It's amazing. Thank you so much. So before we start, a quick rule. If you have any question during the session, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section, not in the chat box, please. We will answer all of them, we try at least, at the very end of our presentation. So let's go. Thanks again for joining. My name is Lawrence. I've been with DH for over 7 years now, and I'm absolutely delighted to host this webinar today alongside Laura from Cvent. Laura, thank you so much for joining me today. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, just thank you so much for having me, Laurence. It's a pleasure to be here with you and DH Hotel partners from around the globe. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Laura. So today we are going to dive deep into corporate travel insight, analyze how the market is moving, and most importantly, help your hotels help you get fully prepared for the upcoming 2027 RFP season. Before we begin, a quick reminder of our mission here at DH. Our goal is clear: to simplify hospitality. We develop easy-to-use, seamless e-commerce solutions that are deeply connected to your global ecosystem, helping you focus on what matters most, your guests. Our goal is to support you at every single stage of the guest journey, from the first moment someone thinks about traveling to the booking process, right through to their post-stay and return. We've got you covered every step of the way to ensure your guests get the best possible experience. Here is our agenda for today. We will start with a quick refresher of the GDS. Then we will look at the data to answer a crucial question: is the GDS still a relevant corporate channel today? After that, we will discuss how we can get the most of the upcoming RFP season, following by exclusive market leads shared by Laura. Finally, we will open the floor to your question in a Q&A session. To start, let's take a fresh look at the GDS. What does the global distribution system look like in today's landscape? It is dominated by three major players: Amadeus, Sabre, and Travelport. Travelport includes Galileo and Warspan. DH, of course, connect your property to the entire GDS network, putting your hotel in front of over 550,000 travel agencies around the globe. What makes the GDS so resilient is that it acts as a single point of access for corporate travel agents. When a travel management company books a trip, they aren't just looking for an hotel room. They are booking flights, trains, rental cars, and accommodation all in one single integrated workflow. For years, people have been predicting the death of the GDS, thinking OTAs and direct booking would completely take over. But the reality is quite different. Let's look at the data. If we look at DH data between 2022 and 2026, the answer is clearly no. In fact, GDS booking volume grew by nearly 90%. At the same time, the financial value is up. The average spend increased from 423 euro to 490 euros. This proves that the GDS is very healthy and keep bringing high-value business to your hotel. If we look at post-pandemic data, GDS volume has seen massive growth. Booking shot up by over 13% recently, and even though market share growth is stabilizing around 7 to 11% this year. It is strategic impact. It is huge. Why? Because the GDS target premium guest. We are talking higher average rate, longer stay, and reliable business during the week. In fact, the GDS is now the #1 channel for corporate bookings. Now let's have a look about the average room rate. If we look 3, 4, and 5-star hotel within the DH client database from 2022 to 2026, the GDS consistently delivers the highest average rate. In 2026, the GDS reached an ADR of 231 euro, outperforming direct booking at 228 and significantly beating OTA like Expedia and Booking.com. This visual comparison between 2024 and 2026 highlight that growth. GDS rate grew by another 5.5% over the last 2 years. This demonstrates that the GDS corporate segment is highly resilient to market changes and willing to pay premium rates for the right properties. Let's look at the rate type on Amadeus, the GDS Amadeus. From 2024 to early 2026, corporate negotiated rate represent the biggest part of booking, reaching over 77%. This clearly shows the corporate contract as the main driver here. It's exactly the same story for Sabre GDS. Corporate rate accounts for over 61% of booking, rising to 62% this year. If we add consortia at nearly 12%, almost 3/4 of Sabre booking are purely professional travel. And finally, look at Travelport GDS data for 2026 year to date. Negotiated rate stands strong at 63% compared to the 37% for public rate. No matter which GDS platform we look at, corporate and negotiated business dominates. For more data, feel free to scan this QR code. It links directly to our website where you can find our latest article about GDS data. So, how can your hotel capture more of this lucrative business? First, ensure your property amenities match corporate needs. Think free Wi-Fi, seamless transport option, and adequate workspace. Second, keep your GDS content perfectly up to date. This is crucial. And third, analyze your current database and local corporate market. Finally, for international companies, you must be fully prepared to participate in the next RFP season. And this is a perfect transition to the next part of our webinar. I'm now handing over to Laura, who will guide you through Cvent exclusive market insight and share the best practices to the upcoming sourcing this season. Laura, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laurence. And that does tie nicely with what I will be walking you through today. So high level, I will be sharing some information about Cvent and the different types of buyers that source on the Cvent Transient platform. Now, I will say I will refer to it as Cvent Transient. Most of you might think of the platform as it was formerly known, which is Lanyon. But I'm going to continue throughout the rest of my section to refer to it as Cvent Transient. So I'll tell you a bit about our buyers, and then we'll look at sourcing insights and also some updates from what we're seeing from a global perspective. Then we will look at how Cvent can support you as hoteliers throughout the corporate RFP season. We will dig into some best practices. Now, Laurence has touched on some of those already. They will be reinforced in my section. And as Laurence predicted, we will have questions and answers at the end. Okay, so without further ado, apologies, I'm trying to go to the next slide. I'm not sure if that's me or not, but thank you. So before I get on to the trends, just a reminder here, the Cvent Transient platform is not a booking tool. So our platform facilitates the negotiation process between corporate buyers, travel management companies, and you as hoteliers. But what I cannot share with you, unfortunately, is production data that happens through the GDS. Luckily, you're in great hands, of course, with Laurence and the rest of the DEdge team because they can share that information with you. Cvent don't have visibility. So my data will be based on the negotiation period process. Now, I talked about the different types of buyers that use the Cvent Transient platform. So top left, we have examples of consortia programs. They're your pay to participate types of organizations. So smaller companies that don't necessarily have buying power on their own form together to form a consortia, and then they will release an RFP for you to access multiple hotels, multiple programs, under the consortia banner. Then along the bottom, we have examples of travel management companies. These are working like agencies on behalf of the end corporate customer. So the corporation has outsourced the sourcing element of the RFP process to a travel management company. And then top right, we have examples of direct corporations that are sourcing and managing their travel program on our platform. Now, the good news is we are always looking to try to grow the different logos that we work with. Here are some of the logos that we acquired in 2025 for the 2026 RFP season, and we have already acquired more new logos in 2026 for the 2027 RFP season as well. Again, we're always looking to grow. So let's talk about now what trends we're seeing from a global perspective in the market. Now on this slide, imagine that everything on the left of that dotted blue line down the center of the slide, imagine that represents sourcing in the calendar year before the program year start date. So for example, if we're talking about the 2024 contract year in blue, everything to the left of that dotted line represents sourcing that happened in 2023 calendar year. Everything on the right of that dotted line represents RFPs sourced in 2024 for the 2024 contract year. Now you can see that a lot of the RFP volume is coming in between July and November, the calendar year before the contract year begins. And that's the same if we look at 2025 contract year in green and also for the 2026 contract year in purple. Most of the sourcing is happening the calendar year before, but we will always get RFPs in the year for the year. And that is represented on the right-hand side of the chart between January and December in the year for the year. Now, if we look at these red and these yellow lines that are going across up until the end of April, you can see what we're doing is we're comparing the 2026 program year to the 2024 program year in yellow and also to the 2025 program year in red. And we're actually pacing 5% ahead in 2026 of where we were same time last year for the 2025 contract year program and we're pacing 1% behind where we were same time 2 years ago for the 2024 contract year. So far going well globally. Now, whereas on the previous slide, we looked at pacing where we were same time last year. On this slide, please consider that 2026 is incomplete because, as we saw before, we still have many months before the end of 2026. So we know that we will continue to receive more RFPs between now and the end of the 2026 calendar year for the 2026 contract year. However, contract years 25 and 2024, they are complete. Now, what we can see here is that ultimately, in the total RFPs, 2026 numbers have already exceeded the total amount of RFPs for the 2025 contract year. So that's whatever we receive now between June of 26 to December of 2026, we know that that 5% pacing ahead is going to continue to grow. But there's still a gap if we look at 2026 so far compared to the completed 2024 calendar year. So 2024, we finished at total 341,000 RFPs. We're currently just under 329,000 for the 2026 contract period. So we may reduce that 1% deficit that we saw on the previous side. We don't know yet that we will necessarily bridge the complete gap, though, between that 341 and the 329,000 RFPs. In terms of the hotels solicited or invited to the RFP program, you can see that that has grown tremendously since 2024 and 2025. We're already at over 65,000 hotels globally that received at least one invitation to an RFP program. Now, the last two metrics on this grid refer to the average weighted rate submitted and accepted. Now, we call it the average weighted rate because in the platform, as hoteliers, you are able to submit up to 5 rates depending on the season. And not every season is equal. Maybe season 3 for your hotel might be approximately 8 months long, whereas seasons 1, 2, 4, and 5 might be a month, month and a half each. Now, because it's a weighted rate, season 3 in that example would have more impact on the overall average. So we're not simply taking 5 rates, adding them together and dividing by 5. It is a proportional rate depending on how big the season is. Now, what you can see for submitted rates and accepted is there's a real flattening of rates negotiated. But as Laurence said, what is booked in the GDS tends to be that much higher. And that's something that we are seeing as well on our side. But in terms of what's negotiated, there's definitely a flattening. There's not a massive hike. Of course, that will depend per market. But from a global scale, there is a real flattening out of rates, both submitted and accepted. And you will see here as well that the submitted rate is usually ever so slightly higher than what is eventually accepted, because of course the buyers have one job in mind, and that is to bring the rates down lower with your hotels, sadly. Now, next up, we're looking at globally which are the top cities on our platform. And there's no bias here. We're simply looking at the unique programs that are sourced into those cities. And by unique programs, I mean the likes of Amex, for instance, sending an RFP, or Adidas or IBM. So those unique programs that release an RFP into market. So London is leading the way, but we also have several cities across the APAC region, as well as you can see here, Sydney, we've got Shanghai, Tokyo, Melbourne. So many markets within the APAC region also featuring in that top cities there. Now, next up, we're taking those top cities and what we're looking at is how the average weighted rates have changed if we compare 2026 to 2025, represented in blue, and then 2026 compared to 2024 contract year, represented in green. And we have some different results. Now, interestingly, you will see that Singapore and Shanghai, for instance, have seen a reduction in the average weighted rate accepted. And we have spoken to different hotel chains and independent properties in those markets. And we are hearing feedback. And it's not just those markets, but in some cases, hotels are having to reduce their rates in order to stay in programs that they've been part of for many years. And that's not an isolated case. So if you're experiencing that, don't feel afraid, don't feel bad. It is something that is happening with many buyers, and they are pushing back on hotels and they're asking for a reduction in prices in order to keep those hotels in certain programs. Now, on the flip side, you can see other markets are doing very, very well. Tokyo, for instance, and Bengaluru are seeing double-digit growth in if we compare 2026 to 2024. But for the most part, it is single digit growth that we are seeing across those markets. Now, next up, what we're looking at is how the sourcing has changed from like for like programs. So buyers that sourced both in the 2025 contract period and the 2026 contract period. And we're asking the question, did they keep their program size the same in terms of number of hotels invited? Did they reduce the number of hotels or did they increase? And you can see the results here. What we've done is we've sorted the industry type by those that represent the most programs. So manufacturing sends the most RFP volume through the system, the most unique programs. Then it's finance, insurance, professional, science, tech, and you can see the list. And for the purpose of aesthetics and making this clearer, we have capped it at those programs or those industries that represent at least 10 or more programs. Now, how would you interpret this slide? Ultimately, if at your property you're working a lot with corporations that represent healthcare or admin, waste management, or transportation and warehousing, you can see that there's a higher proportion of those like for like programs in 2026 that reduced the number of hotels they invited to their program. So, of course, if that's a key business industry segment for your property, you need to make sure that you are focusing on those relationships. Because if this is a trend that continues into 2027 program year, contract year, you don't want to be the hotels that are getting cut. It's not all bad news. There are some buyers that are increasing the size of their programs, and you can see that in green. And of course, the darker the green, the higher percentage of those programs that are increasing. So, for instance, if we look at construction, if we look at utilities, there's more of those programs are increasing the size of their programs and inviting more properties. And we also have many that are staying the same as well. But there are opportunities and some risk elements. So just make sure you're really focusing on those relationships and doing what you do best as hoteliers. Now, in terms of hotel level solutions, there are not many on the Cvent transient system, so we're going to walk through those relatively quickly in the next few slides. First up is proximity report. Now, ultimately, the proximity report is a prospecting tool. It's a separate subscription, so it's not part of your standard RFP access. If you wanted to understand, though, all of the corporations that are sourcing on the Cvent Transient platform for negotiated rates with hoteliers within a 10-mile or 10-kilometer radius from your property. The proximity report will provide you a prospecting list. It will tell you all the corporations, their address, how far they are from your hotel doorstep, and also did that corporation invite you to their program for the last RFP season. So you can take that information and then do what hotel salespeople do best, go to them and sell your hotel. So it is a proactive solution, but it's helping you by taking away that manual process of researching, where do I start? Who should I approach? What are the corporations in my market? Here is an example of the proximity report. A little bit difficult to see on this slide, I appreciate, but ultimately what it's telling you, as I said before, is the corporation, the address, how far or how close they are to your property, and did they invite you to an RFP. So it's a great way to gain insight into the opportunity that exists on your doorstep for your property. Now, RFP Publisher, if you're working with DEdge, you will already know you have access to great discounted rates for responding to your RFPs and managing those corporate RFP programs in one place. Now, because of the partnership that Cvent has with DEdge, DEdge are able to give you much more favorable rates. And so to access this, and I know Lawrence provides a lot of great, fantastic support to the DEdge hotel partners in executing those RFPs. But RFP Publisher is essentially that hub where you can respond to your RFPs in one place, create your rate plans in advance so that you can be better prepared and more efficient in your responses during the busy RFP season. Next up is business intelligence. Now, again, this is a separate subscription, but if your hotel wants to understand what is my comp set offering? Am I potentially leaving money on the table when I submit a bid to this buyer? Or maybe it's a case of in 2027, I need to increase my rates with a particular account, but how do I know what would be a good rate to offer them? And what should I be including as part of that rate in terms of amenities? Then the business intelligence solution is for you because not everyone has access to this information. In many cases, we hear from hotels, you're effectively bidding blind. You have no idea what the other hotels in the market or in your comp set are doing. This is where business intelligence comes in to help you better plan and execute on those RFPs so that you can potentially gain access to new accounts, but also optimize the revenue stream for existing accounts. Now we're going to look at some best practices, and these, because Cvent work with buyers and suppliers alike, these best practices have been received straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from those buyer partners that we work with. So first up is in relation to an RFP checklist, if you like, fixing availability and usability. So the single biggest driver of whether you stay in a program or you fall out of a program is, can buyers actually book the rate that you've offered at the room types and the times that they need? So think about your negotiated rates. And Laurence talked about this already when she talked about the GDS specifically. 63%, I think it was, of rates booked on the GDS are negotiated rates. They're not public rates, so it does matter. But think about, are your negotiated rates consistently bookable in the GDS and corporate channels? From the buyer side, a rate that exists in an RFP, but then it doesn't show up when the traveller is searching, is effectively no rate at all. It's no help to a buyer if they cannot book that rate that they negotiated with you on the system. So if you're seeing frequently no availability messages, for instance, or last room availability that disappears on key room nights or key nights that they need to book, then that's a red flag. And those gaps are exactly what gets surfaced in performance reviews, and they can result in your hotel being pushed out of a program. So think about that as you're organizing how your rates are on the GDS and if they are available. Next up is if your average booked rate versus the negotiated rate has a variance of 10% or more for key accounts. So many sophisticated buyers are now tracking the gap between negotiated rate and then the actual average booked rate for your hotel. And as a rule of thumb, if that variance is within 10%, then generally you're seen as a healthy account. But once you drift above that, you start showing up as a top offender. So try to make sure that your inventory is not too tight and you're able to offer the rates that you negotiated with that buyer in the GDS. Because what you don't want to happen is when they do a reassessment of your hotel, they look at what was negotiated versus what was booked, and they make a decision to cut your hotel again. So keep an eye on that as you're going through and working on those account plans. Now, in terms of your initial bid, think about sharpening this up. So, do you have a clearly defined best and final by account and market? Going into RFP season, you should already know what your realistic best and final rate looks like for each of the key accounts within your market. So that means revenue, sales, and account management, that you're all aligned on the rate and the value package that you can sustain across the full year. If your first submission is added because you're expecting 2 or 3 counter rounds, negotiation, etc., you could lose out because competitors might be coming with sharper, more decisive offers at the very start. So just be mindful of that when you're submitting your first bid. Secondly, if the buyer is providing pre-RFP targets, can you meet them or beat them where it matters? Now, some buyers are sent, not all, but some buyers, when they send an RFP, they're sending pre-RFP rate targets that are specific for your property. Now, they're not random numbers. So keep that in mind. They're usually built from spend data, market intelligence, and rolling best available rate. If you can meet or beat those targets, the likelihood is your hotel could be fast tracked straight into the program. Now, treat those targets as a clear signal of intent from the buyer, because on the Cvent transient platform, every RFP on the buyer side is a cost. They pay for every RFP sent. So when they're sending an RFP to your hotel, they've paid for that. There is intent on the buyer side. They want to work with you. But if you want to be fast tracked, think about your how you can meet or beat those pre-RFP targets. And next up, is about aligning your rate type with reality. And Laurence talked about this in terms of what you can offer and amenities. Make it realistic for the buyer. Think of the corporate buyer when you are submitting a response, but also think about that in terms of your rate as well. So not just amenities. Does your rate structure, whether it's LRA, dynamic, with caps, etc., does that match actual market volatility and the buyer's risk for appetite? Because when you choose between LRA or non-LRA and dynamic discounts, step back and think to yourself, does this structure make sense for how this city actually behaves? In very volatile, high inflation markets, many buyers are pushing back on fully uncapped and dynamic rates because they simply cannot budget around them. And we saw what happened in markets like Shanghai and Singapore, where the rate average actually declined. So think about that as you're bidding. In more stable markets, a buyer may be very comfortable with a dynamic rate or a dynamic discount, as long as they can see that it stays within a predictable band. So the key is to match your structure to both real volatility in the market, but also the buyer's tolerance for surprises. Okay, and finally, in terms of strengthening your non-rate value. So firstly, do you clearly articulate your traveler relevance, so your location, your convenience? Because it's all about that when it comes to corporate travel. Start by making it obvious why travelers would want to stay at your hotel. Connect the dots to their reality. How close are you to their office? How close are you to their main client? How close are you to their main client sites if you know them? And the places their people are going to go to after work. Are you in an area where there's lots of bars, lots of restaurants, so that someone traveling for work would be welcome to stay at your property, and it would be inviting because it's close to everything. So spell that out in your conversations with these buyers, walking distance, transport links, so that they know, and make it relevant to their travelers. And finally, are your blackout dates reasonable? Think about if your blackout calendar is too long or it's constantly shifting year on year. Buyers see that as a risk because it makes it harder for them to maintain compliance and also cost control. Wherever you can, try to keep blackout dates tight but also predictable, and document them very clearly in the RFP. Say why that there's a blackout date there so it makes sense to them. Be explicit about which dates are impacted and why, and try to avoid hidden restrictions that only show up at the point of booking. So, for instance, this is a blackout date, but actually at the time of booking, they realize not only is the rate slightly higher, or if it's a fair date, but actually the cancellation policy has changed as well. So try to avoid that and be consistent across what you're offering. Okay, now best practice in terms of your content. Content is key, and it can be the differentiator of whether your hotel is booked or not, especially when that comes up on the GDS. But thinking about it from a sourcing perspective, if you want to know what your hotel profile looks like to the buyer, navigate to the top left of your profile within the Cvent Transient platform. You can click on the hotel link, and that will open up what your property profile looks like to the buyer. Scroll through, have a look, make sure that your content is up to date. Quick signal for you: if you see a question mark in any of the fields as you're going through, that indicates that the field has not been completed. So draw your attention to those, go through your profile item by item, and make sure everything is complete. And finally, if you want to understand, of course, GBTA fields, on your profile again, navigate to the top right, make sure that you're viewing the GBTA fields and that any yellow triangle on the different segment headers has been removed, because a yellow triangle indicates either there's incomplete content or that category of content has not been approved. So make sure you're focusing on there initially. But also, if you want to extend that and make sure you've got your sustainability questions complete, your health and safety questions under the COVID-19 banner, you need to change your custom view to all content, to custom categories, so that you can then see those custom categories below and click on the sustainability and the COVID-19 sections. Especially across Europe and APAC, there is more of a focus on sustainability and what hotels are doing to drive sustainability in their properties for sustainable business travel. So make sure you're completing those ahead of time so that you don't have to think about it then during the busy RFP season. Now that's it from my side. I'm going to hand over to Laurence, but I will stay here for questions and answers at the end.
Yeah, now this slide just to have a quick sum up about this webinar. So of course, first step is to be connected to the GDS. If you want to work with corporation and you submit RFPs, the corporation will ask you to load your rate in the GDS. So first step is to be connected to the GDS and use the correct provider. Of course, check your content and load the appropriate rate You can't imagine how many hotel is not up to date. They do not think about GDS. They think because it's not in internet, it's a very opaque channel, so they don't think to check it every day. So if you can do it at least once per year, ask your GDS provider to send you a copy of your profile, and then you can, thanks to that, update it easily and load the appropriate rates. Yeah. So again, when we do some GDS audit, we can see often that the hotel didn't load the rate. So they take a long time to submit an RFP, and at the end, the rate is not loaded. So it's, yeah, it's not good. Or we can find some bad setting. For example, the sales term is for Sanofi rate is a non-refundable rate. So at the end, it won't be booked or even visible because on the booking tool of Sanofi agent, they won't see a non-refundable rate. So check your loading. And if you work with the Edge is here to support you on every step, of course. Of course, subscribe to the Cvent RFP solution. So this solution is very, very good. Of course, it's not fit to all hotel, of course, but if you have any doubt of that, you can contact DH, or if you are a DH client, or Laura directly if you are not a DH client. And track, of course, your GDS booking. So if you sign with Sanofi and you load the rate on the GDS, then of course track every booking coming from Sanofi. Be sure that Sanofi book your rate. If they don't book, maybe it's an alert and you need to check why. I'm not able to move the next slide. It's the end. Okay, good. So we are here at the Q&A session. So I see that I can see that some of you already asked some question. So some of you are for you, Laura. François Xavier to ask a question. So can you see the question, or do you want me to read it?
No, that's fine. So thank you, Francois Xavier, for the question. So just for the benefit of everyone else, Francois has asked, how would we recommend a small hotel collection to approach or reach the big players so that they can be included in their RFPs?
Yeah.
So to be clear, the Cvent Transient platform is not a marketing tool. However, we do have two solutions available. We talked about one of them today. We have two solutions that would help hotels to gain access to more programs. The proactive solution being that proximity report that we covered. So I would recommend you consider that because it would give you an idea and an understanding of the corporations that are sourcing within the vicinity of your collection of properties and help you understand, okay, well, where is the opportunity, where are they based, and how can I approach these? Now, again, our tool is not a marketing tool, so it would then be on your properties or on your, if you have a marketing team, to reach out to those, or proactive sales team to reach out to those organizations. Something else, Francois Xavier, is also market leads. Now, we didn't cover off on that today, but market leads is something that DEdge again have a discounted access to. So if you're interested in that, that's more a reactive solution. But when buyers are opening up their program, they have the ability to open up their program to unsolicited bids. Now, effectively, they're auctioning off their business and they're saying, we will accept RFPs from qualified hotels. And by qualified, I mean the hotel is the right distance or is within the maximum distance set by the buyer between the hotel and the corporate office they send their travelers to, but also the star rating. Now, if your properties meet that criteria, you would have access to bonus RFPs effectively that you can bid on. So I would suggest considering those, but also, of course, if you're working, if you have any relationship currently with any travel management companies, get in touch with them, ask them what other corporations do they represent that maybe you could work with as well. So work on those relationships. That would be the quick gain. But if you wanted that would be a free solution and a quick gain. But if you wanted a paid solution, Cvent can support, of course, with that proximity report and the market leads. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question about the data from Arlette. So thank you for your question. So if for sure 2019 was a very good year for GDS, but in 2020, from 2022 2023, we surpassed 2019 in terms of data. So I hope I have answered your question. I am adding our contact to my contact. If you have any more questions about GDS, DH or whatever, I will put my email, and I will put also the email in the chat box of Laura. Like this, you can ask any question after the meeting if you didn't have the answer yet. Okay. Laura, there is other. You add other answer on this question about data, Laura?
In terms of the GDS data?
Yes.
Well, again, we don't see the booking side, but Cvent do work with GBTA a lot, and they shared some very interesting data about what was formalized. So yes, 2019, of course, in terms of sourcing, was pre-COVID. In fact, 2020 was pre-COVID in terms of sourcing, because most of the sourcing was done in 2019 before COVID. And yes, there were a lot more RFPs. The spend was much higher. Forecast for the 2020 RFP season, and negotiated rates were relatively high. But 2021, 22, there was a lot of carrying over rates from previous years because there was no one working. Everyone was on furlough and people weren't negotiating rates. But Laurence is quite right. From 2023, I think, or 2024, the bookings data well exceeded 2019. So from that blip, of course, with COVID 2020, 21, 22, 23, we're all lower. Come 24, we're on an uphill trajectory. So again, Cvent don't see the final bookings data, but I know this from having attended many GBTA sessions and worked with them as well. But certainly from an accepted negotiated rate perspective, we've now we've been seeing the recovery post-COVID since the 2024 RFP season.
So we have another question for you, Laura. What's your advice between dynamic rate or flat rate for corporate?
Good question, and thank you for the question. It does really depend, of course, on what the buyer is willing to accept. So on the Cvent Transient platform, the initial rate, parameters, etc., they're all dictated by the buyer, and they will have different tolerances. What I would suggest, I didn't list it in the best practice, but what I would suggest is if a buyer is initially asking for a fixed rate, but maybe your hotel strategy is to go for dynamic, then if you are going to decline the RFP, say that, explain, we're going for dynamic this year because, and maybe your market is more steady. So a buyer might be willing to consider changing their parameters for their program and adopting a dynamic rate strategy for that market if they're not at risk. Remember what I spoke about before, volatile markets or more stable markets, if they're not at risk of having rates up and down all over the place where they cannot budget it, then they might consider, well, actually, for this market, if it's relatively stable, relatively flat, and it's not going to be impacted by major events happening in that market throughout the year, then why not? Maybe I could consider a dynamic rate. But initially, you are going to be led by what the buyer has put forward and requested as part of their program.
Good, thank you. Another question for you from Ms. Bollinger. So which blackout date take precedence? The ones in my profile or the ones in the RFP? Because in the RFP, we are limited to a few dates, whereas in the profile, we can enter many more.
Now, I guess it depends, Eleanor, on how much you want to get into the program. Because if the buyer is saying, we're only going to accept X amount of blackout dates, then do you want to be part of the program? I would adhere to the ones in the RFP and what the buyer is allowing. Of course, if there are periods that you genuinely cannot offer because you've got to sell out and you know about it in advance because something's happening in your market and you've already got pre-booked dates that you cannot offer anything to that buyer, then you have to be upfront about that, of course. But in terms of what takes precedence, I guess it will depend on who the buyer is and how important that buyer is to your property. Can you move some things around? Can you be flexible? That will all depend on your property and who the buyer is and its importance and relevance to your hotel. I hope that answers your question, Eleanor. We've got something else as well from Ariadna.
Yeah.
Does Cvent provide contacts, names, email, phone of the buyers or companies, and are site inspections out of practice? So I think, Ariadne, you might be referring to the proximity report. Unfortunately, we're not able to share information such as contacts, names, email, or phone. Since the introduction of GDPR, there's been a lot of clamp down on what is shareable and what is not. So unfortunately, no, we're not able to share that. I wasn't sure on the other part of that question, in all honesty. So perhaps if you've got time, if you could articulate on that about the site inspections out of practice. I don't know if you mean like fam trips for buyers coming out to visit the hotels. I'm not clear on what you meant by that. If you could clarify, then I'm happy to elaborate. Um, Emanuela asked about nowadays some TMCs, for example, BCD Travel, they book via Expedia Group, the public rate, or they book the B2B rate, which often has flexible cancellation policy. How can I secure to have a real corporate rate from the TMC world? Now, we do get, that's an interesting question, Emanuela. We do get this, we see this a lot. TMCs insist on booking through negotiating rates rather through an RFP process, and hotels will argue many a time this is a laborious process. We go through this every year. We would much rather just give them a dynamic discount or whatever, but we're going to do it. We're going to go through the process, and then the hotels come back afterwards and say, but after all that RFP process and the negotiation period, the TMC still ends up booking in an OTA platform. They don't always book through the GDS. They don't always book the rates negotiated. But why does that happen, Emanuela, or any other hotel, do you think? It happens because there are better rates available. And so, and those better rates are coming through OTA platforms, or in some cases, hotels are saying, book with us direct and we'll get you a better rate, even though you've organized apparently a great rate with that TMC. So essentially, when it comes to actually booking, a lot of people are led by cost. And even though we went through that process during the negotiation rounds, during the RFP season, and that they were promised a great rate, if they can then get that same deal but a lower rate, they will. And so you have to think about why that is happening in the first place is because there are other rates available to them. Now, I don't know the best way to solution that. If hotels can, you know, if they're offering the best rate, make it the best rate. Don't have lower rates available elsewhere because you can guarantee we're only human. People are, they're going to follow the purse. Where they're going to spend money, and that's a challenge. If the rate is available for the same package is available for less, they're going to choose it. So my only advice there is don't have rates that undercut what you promised was the best rate with that TMC. Um, and I don't know how easy that is. So I appreciate, it's not always easy, and sometimes OTAs have their own rules, for making these rates available, but it is a tough one.
I agree. So,
Um,
yeah.
what else do we have? Oh, so Francois added as well. So Francois Xavier extended the question, just said, talking about maybe do we have like an RFI, request for information? Now, Cvent don't offer that as a solution. Now, that we do have um, some you're obviously working with D-Edge. Some representation companies will work with corporations and get those RFIs out. That's not something that Cvent would do on your behalf. So it's not a solution that we offer for that, I'm afraid, Francois Xavier, in terms of you know, getting that RFI from the corporations. We don't do that. We're impartial, so to speak. So we have the platform for buyers to find suppliers and negotiate the rates, but we're not advocating for any hotel suppliers to the buyers or vice versa. Another question. So Ariadne mentioned that they had a client in Asunción, sorry, in Paraguay, that asked how to get in touch with the buyer and invite them for a site inspection. She wanted to grow her corporate business. Our understanding, this is old school. Love to hear your opinion. Okay, so if I've understood Ariadne, then um, you had a client, a corporate client in Paraguay that asked I'm not again, so I'm so sorry, Ariadne. I think I've misunderstood, but you're in contact with someone
Yes,
in Asunción in
exactly. Yes.
Paraguay that wanted to get in touch with the corporate, I believe, and invite them for a site inspection. Okay, because you wanted to grow. Um, I don't think that's old school. I do think it still happens. In all honesty, I think site visits, familiarization trips, I think they do happen, but unfortunately, it will depend on where that sourcing is initially happening. Because if it's a TMC, for instance, and they're working on behalf of global corporations, the reality is the TMC is not going to be going and doing these global site visits. And so that's where, as Laurence was saying earlier, and I've explained as well on best practice, you do need to make sure that your content is up to date because sometimes
Oh,
that's the only view of your property that they're going to get. I
great.
don't know that um, site visits are old school, but of course, if you've got a local contact, then yes, they might come and do the visit, but then you would need to have those conversations with your TMC, whatever rep you're working with, and your contact there, and ask them, would you be willing to come to a site for a site visit? And ask the question. It can't do any harm, I would say.
Okay, so we have a question from Romain. So where to find the proximity report on the platform, please? So in fact, this is something you subscribe for. So you just have to contact the Edge, and this is something we can help you with. So you subscribe, we send the request to Cvent, they will send us a report, and then we share with you after that. I hope I have answered the question. Thank you, Romain. Another question for you, I think, Laura, from Nadia. So we have experienced travel agents, TMC, booking higher rate for employees of companies who have negotiated rates, booking the higher rate because they get commission on this. How do you tackle this to ensure they are booking the correct negotiated rates?
I mean, this is a tough one, and for
Yeah,
it sounds like I've got very slippery shoulders, and I keep saying, "Well, it's not us because we're not a booking tool.
no,
It's not something that we can control." Um, I would, yeah, I don't know,
yeah.
I don't know the best answer for this, in all
Yeah, but
honesty.
we can see often that the hotel load negotiated rate with no commission, and sometimes they can add a promotional rate, which is much cheaper than the negotiated rate, and they add a commission on that. So for sure, the buyer will book this one, and we
Yeah,
get a commission. So it's
yeah,
just to be logic on your rates, the one you put on the GDS.
yeah. And again, apologies. It's because we don't see the booking side of things. I know it happens. I'm very aware of that from all the different industry events and the feedback we
Yeah.
get from buyers and suppliers alike. I'm very aware it happens. Um, I don't have the solution for it. But as Laurence said, if you're aware, just be mindful of that when you're loading your rates onto the GDS, what ones have and do not have commission, and be mindful of that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's time. We need to leave the session now soon. So we have put the contact of Laura in the chat box. And for GH also, if you need any information, so do not hesitate to send any request on this email. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me. Great to have your questions, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.